I'm William Kay, the moderator for the KBBG Meet the Candidates Forum. We're here with Steve Schmidt, the candidate for mayor, Mr. Tavis Hall, candidate for at-large, and Mr. Pat Morrissey, for the candidate for Ward 3. I remind you again, you can call in and ask a question by dialing 235-1515. And I do have a question here from the public. If we could just maybe very briefly answer this. They would like to know what each candidate thinks of the Tea Party. And if you think it does relate to local government, please respond. We'll start with Mr. Morrissey.
What do I think of the Tea Party? Well, I happen to like tea parties. I think there's plenty of people in my neighborhood that like tea parties. As far as it being a political movement, I quite frankly think that it's been destructive. People have their right to their opinion. We live in a free country. We live in a country that allows freedom of speech. But as far as their involvement and their role in government, it has been nothing but destructive. Although it makes for good conversation.
Yes, Mr. Hall.
I also enjoy tea, but when it comes to political affiliations and mindsets on government, I do disagree fundamentally with the Tea Party. I do think that the conversation with our more conservative friends can be constructive. That's not to denigrate folks who simply have a different political philosophy than I do as an admitted progressive, as a proud progressive. But the Tea Party movement in particular has not been good for the conversation. I think that certainly is evident at the national level. I think we can all agree that the national conversation has not been as fruitful as we might like and as we frankly need. When we see $40 billion coming out of cuts to the SNAP program in particular, just today, that's frustrating, and it's harmful and it's hurtful. And you've got a question for what? State politics, the federal stuff, that Tea Party mindset has certainly bled, and my hope is that it doesn't bleed too far any further into city politics. I do believe that it's worthwhile and constructive to have conversations with folks from across political spectrums. That's important. That's what the country was founded on. That we don't all simply agree with each other. We do have differences. We've had the same differences for a long time, but we've got to have that conversation. And my frustration, frankly, with the Tea Party is that conversation quickly turns into a yelling match. I'm about the conversation, frankly. I have no time for the yelling.
Yes. Mr. Schmidt, briefly. And if it reflects to local government, please let me know that too.
Sure. Well, and William, I don't know if maybe what caused the question, the Courier in their review of the mayor and I, for whatever reason, mentioned, I think it was in 2009, that some local conservatives called and asked if they could use my parking lot for a fundraiser. And for those of you that don't know, my building is right down along the river between East 5th and East 6th, so it's a great place to do a variety of things. Having said that, as Tavis knows, I've been a member of the NAACP, and if the NAACP called me up and asked me to use my parking lot for a fundraiser, I'd be happy to let them do it. Since I've owned that building, and I've owned that building now for 8 years, I've had a number of people that have asked to use the parking lot or the building for fundraisers, for wedding receptions, for or not class reunions, but family reunions. And I've been very accommodating because I think it's a great building, and actually I love to show it off. I have to tell you, I have no idea what the Tea Party platform is. I don't know that there actually is such a thing, that there is an actual document that says what the Tea Party is, and if there is, maybe Tavis or Patrick would know that and they could expound upon that, but I really don't know that. I am a fiscal conservative. The little bit I know about the Tea Party from what I hear and read on the news is they are fiscally conservative. I'm not really sure what else they're about, but I do agree with what Tavis said about the whole constructive conversation rather than destructive, and let's sit down and talk about this and see what makes sense for the good of everybody, not just for one class or another. What I have a real problem with are the politicians that break us up into classes and groups and then pits us against each other, whether it's the young against the old, male against female, black against white, and those are the people that I have the problem with.
Good, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. We'll go on to our next question, which has to do with what is your position on the city taking over animal control responsibilities? What are the pros and cons? And let's start with Mr. Schmidt.
Thank you, William. I was one of the council members, and I don't remember the exact vote, but I was one of the council members that did vote against the city taking over animal control. I happen to think that that's a responsibility the city is just not really suited to deal with. I think the Humane Society does a fine job. I think that's very much their mission. You know, the city proposition, and one of the reasons I voted against it was we were going to use a building that we currently weren't using. We were going to use a van that was currently not being used. I mean, a variety of different things to make the budget work for this. We're using items that the city had available that weren't being used. Well, if the city has buildings that are not being used for something, the city should be selling those, because the city owning those buildings is going to result in no property taxes being paid. If the city has a van that's not being used, the city needs to sell that van. I mean, we should not be accumulating these items. And in order to make the budget work for this proposition, it involved a significant number of volunteers, and God bless volunteers. I happen to be the recipient of the Mayor's Volunteer Award, and I'm a huge volunteer. But to run an organization as critical as the animal control with volunteers, primarily volunteers, I think is just a disaster waiting to happen. And you may have seen one of my current TV ads running, talking about the fact that our current episodes, specifically with pit bulls, and I am not pro or con on pit bulls, what I am concerned about are irresponsible dog owners. But in that TV commercial, what it primarily talks about is this conversation about animal control has been going on now for 3 months, and we are back where we started 3 months ago. The conversation started that Maria Tiller and Sandy Grieco from the city were going to come up with some recommendations for the council. Then time went by, then we went to this committee we talked about earlier that was then rescinded because the mayor did not want to have open meetings for that committee. And now we're back to Sandy Grieco and Maria Tiller. Sometime within the next couple weeks are going to come up with some recommendations. Last Monday night at the council meeting, I think you were there, we had a young lady get up almost in tears talking about how there is a neighbor across the street with pit bulls that 3 times has been cited. She is not willing to take her little dog out for a walk at night because of these pit bulls. Another neighbor is not comfortable in going out and working on his car in the driveway because of these pit bulls. Well, it's not the pit bulls, it's the neighbor. And that neighbor needs to, you know, have a come to Jesus meeting, and those dogs need to be either on leashes or in their fence, or they need to be gone. We've got an ordinance on the books that talks about dealing with dangerous dogs. We just, for whatever reason, are not enforcing that ordinance. And if we did, I think that would solve a lot of our problems.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Schmidt. Mr. Hall, and I can repeat the question for our audience. What's your position on the city taking over animal control responsibilities? What are the pros and cons?
Well, and Mr. Schmidt alluded to it. I think the public views this in a couple different ways. Dangerous dog ordinance and the need to either enforce or enhance or redefine is important to people. I can tell you, I was knocking doors this late summer with my son, who is 8 years old. We walked in front of a fence. Didn't see the dog, and the dog nearly jumped over the fence. It happened to be a pit bull. The dog nearly jumped over the fence, which is frightening for a parent. And so I certainly understand the safety concerns of folks. But when it comes specifically to animal control and who should take what responsibility, I had an initial stance on it that I've frankly held since the decision was made to remove the services from Cedar Bend. And that position was that it should be in the hands of, should have been kept in the hands of Cedar Bend. With that said, I have also had conversations, actually very recently, with some of the volunteers who shed light on, one, their capabilities and their current arrangements. I had no idea that we had as much experience with animal control in this department as we do. The conversation has been frankly, almost strictly fiscal, when I think the conversation should be people's safety. Our government's first priority, especially local government, should be the safety of its people. And that should be the first point of conversation. And so when we discuss animal control, we need to have that conversation in regards to the safety of our citizens, not just about the bottom dollar. And so we should work with the existing animal control department and see what we can do to ensure that it's a quality service, and regularly review that department, as we should every department, to make sure that we're getting the best service available. And if that means it goes back to Cedar Bend, then so be it. I'm actually going, it's actually going to be after the election, but I think it's an important thing for folks to do. I'm going to be doing a ride-along with some of our folks with animal control to get some further insight as to exactly what our capabilities are, what our, and so sort of how they stack up against Cedar Bend. And bottom line, it's the responsibility of local government to ensure people's safety, and whether that's done through a city department or through an outside organization, safety should be our first priority.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Hall. Mr. Morrissey, and I'll just repeat the question again for our audience in particular. What's your position on the city taking over animal control responsibilities? What are the pros and cons?
Well, my understanding of this issue, there's several different parts to it, but animal control now is part of the city. That vote was made and it's done. Going into that decision, having talked to a couple of people that are familiar with this, Cedar Bend does a great job at the adoption end of that, but there were some problems with the actual follow-through on calls that were made. And the city animal control hopefully was going to be able to improve upon that, but the problem being there is that they got to be staffed properly. So it gets back to fully staffing and then taking a look at what's going on, and I think that's what we should do, see what's going to happen here with animal control being under the city, and then go from there. As far as the pit bull situation, having met with some of the residents over in the Chautauqua Park area who are very concerned about the pit bull situation, I can see that there is a fervor out there to get something done. And that's up to the city council to do. And the city council hopefully will be acting on that, the members voting on that. The dangerous dog definition needs to be included, as well as what is going to happen to the owners of these dogs, because it's not about a particular breed so much as it is about the owners and their responsibility in taking care of their pets. And that needs to be a focus, and that needs to be taken care of, I believe. The other, something I wanted to add, William, is in response to Steve, and this is completely different, but I got a Social Security increase last year, Steve. I'm on Social Security, and I'm up for another one this year, so it wasn't 0% last year, Steve.
No, I said 3 of the last 4 years.
Well, last year it wasn't. We got an increase.
Right, that was the 4th year.
And also, the Courier itself ranks Waterloo as 5th in overall tax rate. So.
Okay, and I'm only talking about metropolitan areas now, because I know in the past, they tried to compare us to Fort Dodge, they tried to compare us to Ottumwa, and if Waterloo is to the point of comparing ourselves to Fort Dodge and Ottumwa, then we've got bigger
Oh,
challenges
this
than
includes
I ever
Des Moines.
was.
Des Moines is above Waterloo for overall tax rate. Waterloo ranks 5th when you consider the cities and
Now,
islands.
it may be.
That's from the Courier.
It may be.
That's on the
this-
Courier's website,
Okay,
Steve.
and it may be with this 0% last year, because we did the $2 million utility fee increase.
Well, I just
$2
want
million.
I want you to realize that it's not just people talking, that it's actually part of what the Courier website has.
Gotcha, and I
Okay.
said 3 out of 4, Patrick.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go on to question number 7. And by the way, listeners can call KBBG at 235-1515. You're listening now to the Candidates Forum with Steve Schmidt running for mayor, Tavis Hall running for council at large, and Pat Morrissey, a candidate for Ward 3.
Did you have a call-in question? Because I'm probably going to have to leave before 2.
I'd like to get this question
Okay,
first.
sure.
We do have one, but,
Yep.
and this will be your last question, so we'll start with you. I'm going to question 7. In some ways, Waterloo could be considered 2 towns, east and west. Do you agree? And if so, what are your ideas to better integrate the 2 communities?
I think that Waterloo has been, and especially if you go back maybe 5 or 10 years, has been somewhat of a divided town, the east and west. I think that it's less so today than it was 5 or 10 years ago, but I think there is still that issue. I do think though, number one, if you look at a map of the city, I think one of the things you'll see is where maybe 20 years ago Waterloo was relatively evenly divided between east and west. Now I'd say, just looking at the geographic area, the west side of the river is probably 70% of Waterloo and the east side's about 30%. And I just say that for reference point, nothing more than that. But I do think, you know, if you look again over the last 5 or 6 years, I know Councilman Hart and I talk about this a lot when we go around to the neighborhood association meetings on the east side of town. There have been a lot of good things going on in Waterloo. You know, yesterday I'm part of the Chamber Ambassador Group. Matter of fact, I'm president of that this year, and I know Tavis referred to those as the purple coat people during our campaign 2 years ago. But, you know, we were at a ribbon cutting out at the new North Central, I think it's called, facility out just north of Allen Hospital. It's the old Parkview Gardens, moving from Highway 63 south. They built a new facility